Like any decade, the sounds you hear on the radio and now Spotify at the beginning are very different from what you hear at the end. And the 1990s were no exception to this. Grunge, alternative, and gangster rap dominated the beginning, and by the end of the decade, it was all about boy and girl pop groups. There were a different wave of MCs with their own flow and style. And yes, Moby, people did even listen to rave and techno. We went over in our very first episode, Judgment Night. Combining rock and rap together, it was considered very exotic or fresh in the mid 90s. But by the end of the decade, a younger generation of bands that had risen to prominence, it was pretty much the formula, and they were combining a lot of it together, especially after Roots by Sepultura, and this would become known as nu metal. One band that was looped into the group, fairly or unfairly, were the Deftones. But the question is, are they and were they really nu metal? And it's a complicated answer because on one hand, they are marketed with that entire generation of bands, shared billings, and often toured with nu metal groups like Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Snot. Deftones, it's a play on like the doo-wop and surf rock groups of the 1950s, and it's also an homage to hip hop. That song is Most Def, or Def Jam Records, that Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin founded. The band is equally influenced by 70s punk, folk music, avant-garde, and new romantic. And this is a band that's covered Duran Duran, Japan, and you could hear some of Robert Smith, Sade, and Kate Bush influenced the vocalist Chino Moreno. So the answer is, are they nu metal? Not really. So my first experience with the Deftones came in early 1998 when a song, My Own Summer, Shove It, also known as the Shark video, was on heavy rotation on that ancient 20th century TV channel known as MTV. And it was a cool track, but at that point, I really wasn't ready to form a musical relationship with these guys. And the reason for that is I was really into the groups from the beginning of the decade, the Nirvanas, the Soundgardens, the Chili Peppers, Metallica, Megadeth. And at this point, a lot of those bands were either on hiatus, some had even broken up, or they just weren't releasing music as frequently. And so I viewed these young guys who were kind of like being marketed as the everyday replacements as like the upstarts. And I was like, nah, man, I want my guys. This is during that period where I like to call the era of drizzling shits, mid 97 to mid 1999. I just really didn't like that era for whatever reason. And so there's always going to be a little bit of bias. So the band would continue to grow. White Pony was a huge record that came out in the early 2000s. And I remember the hype around Saturday Night Wrist in 2006. But what really got me into the Deftones and what really started this musical relationship, as I like to say, is due to tragedy, unfortunately. And that was in early 2009 when I found out late in the previous year their bass player, Chi Chang, was in a terrible car accident and was in a coma. He would unfortunately never recover and pass away in 2013. I've talked about being a bass player before and playing a lot of bands, and I was an avid reader of Bass Player magazine. And she had wrote an article years before where he was just very encouraging and told kids, hey, whatever your technical limitations are, or if you don't know theory, just keep playing and keep enjoying it. And he even like referred to scales like pentatonic and mixolydian as Star Trek sounding stuff. And that got a laugh out of me. And so he was a cool guy, and I figured, it's time I kind of, give him some good karma, check out his band. So I gave Saturday Night Wrist a spin, and it was a really awesome record. And then I'd go backwards and forwards in their discography and check it out. And it was really cool. 2010's Diamond Eyes, which featured Sergio Vega of Quicksand on bass, and he now is a permanent member, was a fun record. But what really cemented them to me was 2012's Kyoi no Yokan, which was a tremendous album. And that was 17 years into their career. There's often a stigma that bands do all their best work very early in their career. But this band was almost 20 years old. And this is one of the most creative records they made. That's pretty cool. And I actually saw them in 2012 open for System of a Down, and also 2016 headline for the release of their album Gore, an underrated record in my opinion. So at this point, I started thinking more and more about the Deftones and just legacy and what they've done. And I'm like, wow, these guys have been around a really long time. They've had a lot of success, a lot of hits. They've left their mark on the world of music and the industry. And they've had a lot of cool, eccentric side projects. And so with that, I'm like, it's time these guys get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already. And look, let's get it out. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a weird and cheesy organization. It has a lot of weird, strange rules, preconceived notions. They don't make it easy for metal acts to get in, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. There is this kind of like cookie cutter, like, let's sing rock and roll songs and play some power chords, family fun, Schoolhouse Rocks, Guitar Hero, Rock Hero. So to me, they're kind of missing the essence of rock and roll, which while it is for everybody and for the world to hear, it's also aimed for like the outcasts, the misfits. I don't mean the misfits. They deserve to be in that building too, but that's a story for another day. But just to kind of paraphrase Sean Connery from The Rock, it's for people who don't get to go home and fuck the prom king and queen. It's for people who may not have it easy, and just it's a way to help get through life and just connect with something greater. Another big thing about the Deftones too, which is awesome, is that anybody could play this type of music. The Deftones are a multicultural band. They've had Latino and Asian American members playing in them throughout their entire existence. And they play in a genre that often gets criticized, the catering to suburban Caucasian kids. Look, like, imagine a kid is from middle America or from overseas, from China, Mexico, Chile, and just is interested in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and looks up the membership list and sees the Deftones and then goes through that rabbit hole. And it's like, oh, cool, you know something? Chi Chang played in this band. Sergio Vega plays in this band. These are people from the same background as me. Cool, they did it. I want to do something like that. They're an influence. Or, wow, Chino Moreno, that guy's a monster vocalist, just a creative force. And I share the same heritage as him. And that's cool. It's like these little important things that could really make a difference and kind of help improve people's lives. And oh yeah, they also have a new album, Ohms, which is coming out. So listen to that, enjoy it, rock out, and thank you, Deftones. And with that being said, we'll be back shortly. Well, Mummies and I will be back next week with a band that's definitely an influence on the Deftones, Talking Heads. Peace.